Conversations across time. 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 Conversations.
Hi, my name's Mark Hoffman. I'm a proud member of the Conversation Across Time team. I'm a retired history teacher, and tonight's show is very stimulating and very interesting. On the panel is Chief Justice Earl Warren, who was the Chief Justice in the famous Brown versus Topeka Board Education case that integrated the public schools, Oliver Wendell Holmes, who I portray, who came up with the doctrine of clear and present danger, and of course, our host, Vivian Crawford. Tonight's discussion will deal with President-elect Donald Trump's potential nominees to the Supreme Court and how they might deal with the issue of abortion rights, Planned Parenthood, voting rights, and suppression of voting rights.
Good evening. Welcome once again to Conversations Across Time. You'll notice that we have a little bit different setup tonight. I'm here with two guests, two men that I admire, and we had such a heated debate with the last time we were together that it's just something I couldn't wait to get back into. So let me first introduce you to Chief Justice Earl Warren. Welcome once again, Justice Warren.
I'm glad to be back, thank you.
We're glad to have you back. And seated to your left is Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. Welcome, Justice Holmes.
Great to be back.
Now, when we stopped last week, we were actually getting into a very heated conversation regarding what is going to happen with the Supreme Court and with President Trump and his Supreme Court nominations. So I want to jump in with a topic that we must get to, and that is President Trump and a President Trump nominated Supreme Court or appointed Supreme Court and voting rights. And however you want to come into this, please do that, because we do know that under your court, and certainly even with your court, because you had been a justice for, I believe, 16 years before women got the right to vote.
That's true. The 19th Amendment was passed while I was sitting on the Supreme Court.
While you were sitting on the Supreme Court. And Justice Warren, your court was responsible for assuring that disenfranchised people would be able to have the right to vote. I mean, it's...
Absolutely. In the case that settled that redistricting had to be according to population and not according to the voting list. So that was a very, very important decision,
yes.
I think.
Yes.
Of course, it's been eroded.
I was just going to say that, Chief Justice. I was just going to say it's been eroded like the Grand Canyon.
I know last week we argued about Roe v. Wade and how important that issue is and what's going to happen with an ideologue that's appointed to the Supreme Court. I think the voting rights issue is probably more important in the total scheme of things as to what's going to happen with a very conservative Supreme Court. And I'm more concerned about that than I am anything else.
Now, I want
to just say this. I personally ascribe, and I don't want to sound like an ideologue, of course, but I personally ascribe to the one person, one vote, that everybody should have the right to vote. And any restrictions that are
restricting the right to vote?
Yeah, restrictions that are not responsible should not be placed on a person's ability to vote. Well, and I'm very, very strong.
My judicial decisions have basically been one man or one person, one vote.
Well, I think it was one man, one.
One man, one vote, because
I did because
it preceded political correctness.
Right. However, I did have some restrictions, like mentally deficient people shouldn't be allowed to vote. I did have some caveats to that.
There's a caveat to every right. We know that.
Yeah. But you see, voting rights, as we have just seen in this past election, voting rights have been eroded in a way that we've not seen for many years. I mean, the Souls to the Polls movement, which of course, as we know, is the ability to have early voting in some states, and a lot of people, a lot of black churches were very active in taking souls to the polls because a lot of their members may not have had the wherewithal and had to have transportation. So coming to church on Sunday, then you got taken to the polls. So that the erosion of that has
I think
been
it was a
especially
it was
harmful.
a very, very important element in North Carolina.
Oh, yes.
Because North Carolina had restricted the vote by taking away some of the polling places and limiting the amount of time that people had to vote prior to election day. And as a result of that, I mean, they talked about how the black vote was down, and I think a lot of that had to do with the restrictions that were in place in North Carolina. Now, before this passed court, there was a Voting Rights Act, of course, which took the states that had had history of restricting the votes, and they had to, before they enacted any legislation
To
that seemed to
change.
be restrictive, it had to come before an authority to
Yes.
determine whether or not that was constitutionally enabled. And they did away with that, saying that time has passed, and we, again, looking at the situation of society and so forth, and said it was not necessary anymore.
But that's the
But as
that's the
soon as that
post-racial
happened,
myth.
well, yeah, and I know, and as soon as that happened, those very same states, Republican controlled, by the way,
Restricting.
started to pass these laws, and even Pennsylvania had a law that they attempted to pass but didn't pass, that would have required people to have special identification.
Yes.
It would have made it very, very difficult for people to go and get that identification, and of course, restrict
So-
the minorities from voting. So
Chief Justice Warren, it's going to get worse. He's going to appoint a conservative ideologue on the court that's going to uphold the state laws that restrict access to the polls, that discriminate against
Putting it under the penumbra of
elderly
states'
and
rights.
minorities, right? And it's only going to get worse under the new court. And I believe in the last show last week, Ms. Crawford, when we were talking about women's rights and if abortion were made illegal, how that would impact on the poor women who couldn't afford to get abortion. This is the same thing.
This is class warfare.
This is class warfare all over again. This would discriminate against people that don't have cars, people that don't have driver's license, et cetera. And it goes against what we both believe in, that the access to the vote, the suffrage, to franchise should be absolute.
well, you know, I'm certainly going to be on the lookout for that, and I think it's, I know you're taking a real optimistic view, obviously not, but I like to think, again, that it's such an important thing. I mean, the right to vote is really the crux of our existence.
But
in
our
the United
history,
States, and-
the history of this country
and
has
I
been a
understand you're talking
constant
about
battle
ideologues. I-
between people wanting to get the right to vote and the people in power looking to depress the right to vote. And that's been the history of the country going way
Well,
back
well,
Well, let me just take it as,
from the original founders who said
And
you had to have
Hamilton.
own property to vote, to literacy tests, to poll taxes,
Okay,
to
well,
women not
all
having
those
the right
very
to vote.
restrictive measures
Yeah.
have all been ruled unconstitutional.
But wow,
The
that-
real issue, let me just
okay.
get down to
They,
this.
they
This
have
is-
only been ruled unconstitutional way later as time moved on. And
Well,
I'm
it
saying,
takes
I'm
time for
saying
the
I
case to
wouldn't
come to
even
the
be
Supreme
surprised,
Court.
and you might think this is ridiculous. I wouldn't even be surprised if some conservative state with a state governor and a conservative state legislature passed a law which would require some form of literacy test.
I would be surprised.
That
That's a
wouldn't
settlement.
surprise me. I think the court would overrule it, but it wouldn't
settlement
surprise me if they tried it.
The real issue when we're talking about voting, by the way, and especially in the presidential election, this past presidential election, half of the eligible voters in this country didn't vote. And it wasn't because that they were restricted to vote, it's just that they didn't vote. And I think that there's an educational component here that probably has to be addressed. People don't recognize how important that right is in a democracy.
But
that they have to vote, and they should
That's
vote.
true, but-
and they should be informed and vote accordingly.
But-
Not whether they vote for them or us or
Early,
whatever.
So you-
They should
everything that
vote.
you say is true, but all the trends are against that. Early voting is starting to be restricted. Souls going to the polls on buses is being restricted. So the more restriction, less and less people get to, and the harder you make it to vote, the more people throw their hands up and say, what's the use anyway? So you get less of a turnout. And then when you have the elites rule, people say my vote doesn't matter anyway, and we have a situation now where
That's
people
what I wanted
say-
to bring up.
People
There's a lot-
say, well,
there are
the
a lot
fact
of
of the matter is, in the last election, the one that we just had, the popular vote went to the candidate that lost. So if I'm a voter, I say, well, why the hell should I get off my fat butt and go to vote when my vote don't count anyway?
Well, the whole issue was there were only 9 states that really determined the election.
Right, so
if
if
you
I-
lived in California, well, wait a second. If you lived in California and you're a Democrat, why would you go to vote? You know the
Well, that's
Democrats are going to win
well,
anyway.
so
So
we-
the point is to do away with this electoral college.
That's what I wanted,
You
because
want
the
to
electoral
do away with the
college.
electoral college, let everybody vote, and let everybody's vote count. That's the American
But
way.
here's the interesting thing. The electoral college was brought about because Hamilton made the decision that the people that voted weren't intelligent enough to
Well,
know
that-
who would,
well,
that
who,
was-
who,
that-
who should
that
lead.
was
There's a
then
cou-
and this is
there-
now.
No, there's a couple reasons. That's one reason.
Okay.
And it was
The other
urban, it was
reason
urban
they
as
were
as
afraid
opposed
of
to agrarian
foreign
income.
influence, which applies very well now.
Yes.
They were afraid of foreign influence, that a candidate could come and the foreign countries, because they had a lot of resources, could influence our election and get a chief executive elected
wait
that
a
would
minute.
favor the foreign country.
that's already-
And third, it had to do with the South and the Three-Fifths Compromise. The
Yes.
Three-Fifths Compromise only counted African Americans as
as
three-fifths of the
three-fifths of-
Senate.
that's right.
And if you did that, the population of the South would not be enough to ever elect a
Those
Southern
things
president.
don't hold. Those things don't hold true today, and it's
I
time
know
we
they
get
don't
rid of
hold
the
true,
electoral
but no,
college.
the one thing it still holds true is it gives smaller states and states that are maybe not relevant all the power in the world. There's no coincidence
we
that the
should
first.
not elect the president as a consequence of what state you live in. We should elect the president by how
agree
you vote, how the
100%.
individual votes.
I agree 100%, but the fact of the matter is that's how it is. It's not going to change. It's going to take a
I
constitution.
don't think it's a states' rights issue, to tell you the truth. I mean, you want to frame it in that context, but I don't believe it is. When you vote, it's your vote, not your state's vote. It's not how your state votes. It should be how you vote. And then your vote, if you're in California, it would make a difference. If you're in New York, it would make a difference. Even if you're in Ohio, where it's split, it makes a difference. So more people would vote if that's what the
I agree. I
circumstance
agree
was.
100%.
Wait a minute. I want to tell you something interesting, because right after this last election, this presidential election, there was a movement, certainly with people saying, look, we need to influence the electors. The members of the Electoral College need to be influenced to the point where they vote for what is right. And so, of course,
Well, that was the original intent. One
but
of
that
the
was,
original
but
intents.
that was Hamilton's intent, but
Right.
it's been bastardized. So now what we have happening, so this movement is that they should vote their conscience, they should vote what's best for the people, and they should follow what the popular vote was. But this is what made
Well,
it so
even
interesting.
though I'm against the electoral college, it's still ex post facto. I mean, to do
No,
that.
no, but-
I mean,
no.
that's the law, and we have to abide by the law.
No, but
No,
the
but
law,
let
the
me-
law
let me-
is in most
I know
states
that
they're
kind
not
of
bound by
voter
they're not bound by the popular vote, and they don't. And that's the whole point of it. They could theoretically vote for anybody.
Well,
We
wait a
know that.
minute. But wait a minute. But my point is this. This is what I want to get to. So I look up the electors. You know, I say, well, okay, this is a movement that's going on, and I've got people who watch the show who are looking for that interact with us on the internet. And so I said, well, okay. So we do just some research. It takes us a short amount of time to come up with that. A lot of the electors, and then we come up with who they are. We identify them. One is a woman that's an elector, but she's the head of the
Well, that's
assistant
what-
head of the Republican
that's what
Party.
they do.
She
That's
owns a company that makes pipes, and
Well, no,
she's
that's-
big
that's
on the
who the
fracking.
electors are.
On fracking. So she's not going to vote anything other than what's for her vested interest. And so you start to realize, and one person is the head of.
Well, wait a second. Are you suggesting that if the Democrats would have won Pennsylvania, that
No, it's the
person-
same thing. It's political connected people become the electors.
That's who
I
becomes the
understand.
electors.
I know
in
what it is.
fact, Trump is running scared. Because of this connection with Putin and the Russian hacking. He's threatening their political careers of these electors who have held political positions or whatever, so to make sure they hold the line and vote for him. Now, I'm sure that's not going to overturn the election. I don't think that's
No,
going
we
to
don't.
happen.
We don't think that's going to happen. But what I do think is interesting about this is that we're looking at the Electoral College, and as you're saying, Justice Warren, your belief is it should be that your vote should count, and if you whatever I mean, because we know at this point Secretary Clinton got 2.5 million more votes than did President Trump, and by the same token, President Clinton got more votes, more popular votes than Barack Obama got, President Obama got against Romney, and that was considered a landslide. So how is it that things are so upside down? It's like Alice in the Looking Glass. So things are so backwards that 2.5 million more people think that Secretary Clinton should have been president. Now, we know they're not going to overturn the election, but we got to talk about that. We have to look at that from the standpoint of the Supreme Court. And what does the Supreme Court mean when it comes to voting rights? They're chipping away.
I thought when that case came before me that that's what it meant. It meant that one person has one vote. That's why you just don't draw the pool amongst eligible voters. It's everybody. And give everybody a chance to vote and to vote for it. So if a case like that came to me, I would certainly argue that it should be the popular vote and shouldn't be the Electoral College. And that's the way I think we ought to move forward.
You think it's possible?
Anything's possible.
Okay.
Yeah, anything's possible. Not if
Well,
we get our ideologues on it.
I don't think it's possible, and don't forget we've had situations like this in
Well, they
American
didn't think it was
history
possible
before,
that women would vote
and-
either, you know.
And right, and it took a long time.
Well,
The
it may take a
suffrage-
long time, but
The
I think it's
suffragette
possible.
movement?
But the one thing I will say, every election where the candidate that won the popular vote but wasn't elected by the electors, those 4 presidents turned out to be really poor presidents. That they were all bad presidents.
Okay, so-
We'll see.
So that's well, no. What
Yeah,
it
oh,
says
no,
is
I know.
what it
That's
says
the
is
past I'm
in
talking
a
about.
democracy, the people really do know, and you should let the democracy
Well,
work.
No, but the 4
That's easy to
presidents.
say.
The 4 presidents.
It was John Quincy Adams,
Yes,
Hayes.
yes.
Trying to think of the other one. Harrison, William Henry Harrison,
Yes.
and Bush.
And Bush.
And
And then we end up with what we ended up with.
Right. Well, look what happened with Bush.
Yes.
I
no
mean,
question.
you can say whatever you want, and that was a very similar thing, and probably Gore would have won the electors too if the Supreme Court didn't intervene in a recount in Florida.
There
So
we have
there-
it. We're
so-
back to
so-
the Supreme Court and how important it is,
Right.
and the fact that President Trump has the opportunity to.
With all due respect to Chief Justice Warren, that issue was purely political, and there wasn't a justice on the court that looked at what was good for the country and what was right or wrong in the issue of the.
Who's to say what's good for the country at that point in time?
Well, if you believe in democracy, the will of the people should win out, and that the court didn't rule it that way.
Yeah, but it turned out that the vote in Florida was, Bush won the vote in Florida by 525 votes.
But they stopped the votes.
Well-
The Supreme Court stopped the counting. That was what Scalia did. He stopped the counting because he said it was stretching out too far and it was a danger to the
But
country.
I want
I
to say.
think when it
And he
all
was
ca-
trying
when
to
it was all
quote me,
counted and said
clear
and
and
done.
present danger to the country, and he was full of baloney. But the bottom line is.
That was strictly I agree with you. I was strictly a
So,
political.
and nobody was looking what was right or wrong, and they even went against their their philosophical principles to get an outcome that favored their politics.
Look what happened in the last 8 years. Very few of our citizens were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. There wasn't the same commitment to war that there was before. The economy was in the.
Yeah, that's because
the
we had a
economy was in
president that
crap
was
house
elected in the
when our last
democratic
president
manner.
took over, and the economy has rebounded. Things are looking much brighter. The confidence of the people are better now.
What-
It's changed. It's bad, and it's going to be bad, but because of the way our government works, and because of the way democracy works, and because of this particular country works, things get better. You look at it, as I said last week, you look at it with the glass half full.
But that, it's
Half empty, I'm
there's
sorry. And I
something.
look at it as
When I studied economics in Harvard, there was something about if unemployment happens, the invention, because I came along with the automobile and Henry Ford, that blacksmiths lost their job, and the economists argued, well, they'll get jobs in the automotive factory in the long run, and it improves the economy in the long run. Everybody is better off, and that's what you're saying. But there's a counter to that, and the counter to that is in the long run we're dead. You can say in the long run the
Everybody dies.
country, right? But you can say in the long
I'm
run
talking about the long
country,
run for the country, not
right?
the long run for the
But
individual.
what about the people now that are going to suffer this, the outrageousness that might happen under this president-elect?
Which outrageousness, though?
Yeah, wait a
Well,
minute.
There's a lot of outrageousness.
There's-
and no-
Voter restriction on free speech, restriction on women's rights, restriction on rights of minorities. That's just 4.
let me just say something interesting because
First of all, none of those things have been put into action
Well,
yet.
he's not president yet.
Well, okay, so
But-
let's
but-
wait and see what happens.
but here's
I mean, I'm not happy about it either, but let's wait and see what happens because I don't think all of those things are going to come to pass.
But I want to throw something out because I ran into two friends who are visiting from Southern California, and this is a couple, and these are two gentlemen who have been very involved. They're they're Republicans, and of course they are members, very early members, if not founders of. Or among the founders of the Log Cabin Republicans. And so I asked a question. I mean, and they are my dear friends, and I so much love sparring with them. So I said, let me ask a question. How did the Log Cabin Republicans, how did they make themselves endorse Donald Trump? How were they able to do that? And why would they do that? Because, and so I was looking at that, of course, that Pence, as the vice presidential candidate, who thinks that planned all of the money for AIDS research should be diverted to programs to un-gay people, I mean, to switch their orientation somehow, pray them away from being gay. And I said, how could, with Trump having him as a running mate, could the LGBT community or the Log Cabinet specifically endorse Donald Trump? We took out an ad in USA Today, and we made certain that those ads, that USA Today was delivered to all of the electors. And as it would happen and as it would develop, these electors, when they stood up, they embraced our issues because we see a larger picture. Now, so I pressed because that wasn't enough for me, and I asked the question, well, okay, but I mean, Pence, how do you explain Pence? Because you as justices are certainly not nonpartisan. But I thought about that, and I still have questions as to how myself as a Democrat, and watching the Democratic Party sort of sit by and let this man be elected president with a flawed candidate. Because one of the things that they said to me is that a lot of that vote was not so much pro-Trump as it was anti-Hillary. So I know that's a lot, but I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, and I have gay friends too. And the issues are not just gay issues.
They're not social issues.
Right, not just social issues, not just gay. You don't have to be gay to be you can be a Republican and be gay because their issues, the ones that are doing very well, and your friends economically,
right,
and your friends are, I met them, and their issues are really economic. So they can couch whatever they say about, what they believe they're going to, because they don't really care what they're going to do as far as, and they may care, but they don't care as much about what's going to happen with the technical legal issues about gay marriage and so forth. More important to them is what's going to happen as far as the economic issues that are going to be brought forth by a Republican president. And I think that's where they're at. And I think if you go with the Log Cabin Republicans, which of course are the gay Republicans, you're going to find that that's their primary issue.
Of course.
They don't really believe that they're going to advance gay rights, even though this past conservative Supreme Court and a conservative with Scalia on the court, and nobody's going to be appointed who's going to be
any more
conservative than
Scalia.
him, of course, found that gay marriage was legally constitutional under the law, and the Defense of Marriage Act was unconstitutional. So there's no reason to believe that that's going to change, and they really believe that the economic issue trumped that.
That'll change.
Trumped it.
Trumped it.
But I think there's other issues that involve the gay community that I think the states will start restricting, and the court might uphold those.
The religious issues,
aspect of it. So in other words, if someone owns a catering service or photography studio.
It's already happened in Kentucky or
Right,
Tennessee where the woman refused to issue a marriage
that's
license
what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
to a gay couple because it was against the religion.
Right.
But the court stood up under
But
those
I
circumstances.
think this
and
court
found
will
that she
start
was-
to
I
not to
don't think that's
overturn
gonna
the whole
change.
gay marriage, but start to erode gay rights on those levels.
Listen, there's a right, of course, there's a freedom of religion, it's one of our rights, and there's a right to a lot of things. and none of the rights, as you know, is absolute.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
nobody can
freedom
shout
of
fire in the theater.
religion,
Can they?
because
In a crowded theater.
I mean, you can believe a lot of things. I mean, there's been restrictions on freedom of religion. You can't believe in snake charmers, rattlesnakes. There was religion, and the court ruled on that. In fact, it was right before I was on the court, I think that case came up. So, but the court's going to uphold the religious restriction on giving gays their rights. So if the religious group
So
or
they'll hold it-
religious
yeah.
thing
Well,
says,
I think it depends again on what the issue is, what the religious
right,
issue is,
but-
and what the issue is that.
but there's
A
like,
lot of the laws that have been passed, by the way, where there are objections from religious institutions, have accommodations in the laws, like in the Affordable Care Act. I mean, there are certain instances in there where a strictly religious organization that hires people, like a church, for instance, they don't have to provide free contraception
yeah,
to
but
the people.
could a church, suppose a church said, we won't hire a janitor to sweep the floor because he's gay, because our religion is against gays. Now, would that be constitutional? And I contend that the conservative court would uphold the right of the church to do that.
I don't believe that. Okay.
How about there's somebody on the short list, Diane Sykes, and she sits on the Seventh Circuit, and let me just quote this. Sykes' most revealing opinion may be her argument in Christian Legal Society versus Walker, Walker being Governor Walker, that anti-gay groups have a constitutional right to continue receiving government subsidies even if they engage in discrimination. She went so far as to deny that the anti-gay organization at issue in this case engaged in prohibited discrimination at all because it made an exception to its discriminatory policies for gay people who refrain entirely from having sex.
So in other words, they
Absurd.
could
I
be
mean,
gay.
You're going to find
they
churches
could be gay.
all over that make absurd decisions.
But she's on the short
But she's
list.
not going to be on the. She's not on the Supreme Court.
She's one
and
of-
she won't
no,
be on the Supreme Court with that
She
decision.
might not, because I think, but she's on Trump's list.
She's on the list.
She's on
That's what I'm
Trump's
saying.
list.
I
And
don't care who's on this list.
Well,
Hitler could be on this list. Doesn't make any
but
difference.
I think Trump will be more apt to back off a justice that's against
The LGBT
gay
community.
rights than he is against
Roe
the
v. Wade.
justice that's against women's rights. That's just my opinion.
Well, you think he's a misogynist, a closet misogynist?
No, I just think it's a more important issue to the conservative base. They're both important, but I think the abortion issue's been at the forefront of the conservative base for so long that he almost has to bow down to that.
He has to follow through with that
Right.
promise.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you say the conservative base. I don't know what the conservative base is. Is the conservative base Ryan's platform? I mean, where they want to defund Planned Parenthood and
Yeah.
privatize Social Security and Medicare.
Well,
Is
that's a different
You think that
issue.
has general acceptance amongst the people, even amongst the
Yeah,
Republicans? I
but
don't
we're
think
going
so.
back to that. I don't believe that they care what the people want. I don't care. I mean,
Well, they can't care, but every one of their candidates got creamed by Donald Trump, who railed against all those things that they were in favor of. So why did the Republicans rebel against themselves if it wasn't because of the platform that was put forward that didn't make sense
yeah,
to
but
them?
now they have a chance to institute what they've been trying to institute for a long time, and the control of the court. First of all, I looked at Miss Crawford showed me the list before the show, and they're very young.
They'll
So
be around for a
they'll
long
be
time.
around for a long time.
They have a chance to change over that period of time too, just like some
Well,
other
Just,
judges.
just like some other
Chief Justice,
justices.
we don't
To
we- we-
evolve.
we
They
don't
can
agree
evolve.
with that.
And let me tell you
Some
something. There's a
people
good
evolve and
chance.
some-
It happened with Kennedy now. It's on the way with Roberts. And you're going to see, he may not become a bleeding liberal, but he's certainly going to move closer to the more centrist position.
I
and the
think-
more back to the common sense.
I think
issue,
it's the other way
back to
around.
common
As the
sense.
court gets more conservative, Roberts will become more
I
conservative.
don't think so.
Now let
I
me
don't
just say
think
this.
so.
Okay, gentlemen, this is again another heated discussion, and you realize we're at the end of the episode. So with that, Thank you, Justice Warren.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Holmes.
Great to be here.
It's been our pleasure. This is Conversations Across Time, and we hope that you have enjoyed this show, but we also hope you've learned something. 'Cause as we always say, we're not trying to tell you what to think, we're just trying to make sure you are thinking.